Every night at 9 p.m., the same thing happened. A little girl, no older than 7, curled up on the cold metal bench in the park, wrapped in a thin blanket, her small fingers clutching a threadbare stuffed rabbit. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just waited. Waited for sleep to take her away from the hunger. And just across the street, in a glass tower lined with warmth, art, and marble floors, a man sat alone in his penthouse. His windows overlooked that very park. But he never looked down. Until one night, he did. And what he saw changed everything. Her name was Elsie. 7 years old, thin as a twig, with hair the color of worn chestnuts and eyes too tired for her age. Each evening, just after sunset, she arrived at the same playground, pulling a red plastic wagon behind her. Inside were all her worldly possessions: a small pillow, a folded newspaper, a box of dry crackers, and an old stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She didn't play. She didn't laugh. She didn't even look around. She followed a quiet routine: sit on the swing, stare at the sky, then settle in on the bench. Newspaper spread out. Blanket over her shoulders. Arms wrapped tightly around her rabbit. She became a part of the scenery. A shadow on a bench. No one knew where she came from. No one asked. But how long can a child remain invisible in the heart of a city? Just across the street, in a glass tower that reflected the stars back to the sky, lived Mr. Harland Voss, age 53, billionaire, and master of empires. He lived alone in a penthouse of stone and silence, his closest companion a ticking grandfather clock in the hallway. Yet, Harland hadn't always been made of marble. Long ago, before the empires, before the headlines, Harland was a boy with a younger brother, Caleb, who never made it to age 7. Pneumonia stole him in the dead of winter, and nothing was ever the same again. That loss carved something hollow into Harland's soul. And instead of healing, he built around the hole brick by brick until nothing could touch him. Not joy. Not pain. But that morning, sipping bitter espresso and staring absently out his triple-glazed window, Harland noticed her. Really noticed her. The thin shoulders. The way she never looked up. The rabbit clenched like a lifeline. And something ancient stirred inside him. Something he'd buried beneath decades of silence. The days grew colder. The city moved faster. And Elsie, unnoticed, kept shrinking into herself. She was careful, so careful not to draw attention. She never begged. Never complained. She stayed out of sight, her tiny figure blending into the forgotten corners of the playground. But her silence wasn't strength. It was survival. At night, she whispered stories to her rabbit, stories her mother used to tell. Fairy tales about warm homes and brave little girls. But the stories were starting to blur. Her voice, once eager, now trembled in the cold. Across the street, Harland watched from his penthouse like a man watching ghosts. Every evening, he told himself it wasn't his business. That she must have someone. That someone else would step in. But each night, she returned. Alone. And each night, she looked smaller. Why was no one doing anything? Why wasn't he? He told himself he was busy. Important. That he'd never been good with children. But the truth was simpler: he was afraid. Afraid that if he got involved, he'd have to feel something again. And feeling meant remembering. And remembering meant pain. Yet one night, something shifted. It was nearly midnight. Snow fell in silent sheets. And Elsie wasn't on the bench. Harland paced his living room, restless. He'd grown used to seeing her, strangely dependent on her quiet presence, like a habit he hadn't meant to form. He turned off the lights, hoping to shake the unease. But as he passed the window one last time, he saw it, a small figure curled not on the bench, but on the cold ground beside it. Her blanket soaked. Her rabbit dropped in the snow. He froze. The espresso cup in his hand slipped and shattered on the marble floor. For the first time in decades, Harlan felt panic crawl up his chest. Real, human panic. He ran. He didn't call security. He didn't overthink it. He simply ran. Down 47 floors. Across the street. Into the park. And there she was, Elsie, barely breathing, her lips blue, her tiny hands curled inward. He knelt beside her, unsure of what to do. His hands trembled. His breath caught. "Hey," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hey, sweetheart." She didn't stir. He took off his coat, cashmere, tailored, expensive, and wrapped it around her. He scooped her up, cradling her gently, terrified by how light she was. She moaned faintly. "Mommy." Harlan's throat tightened. That one word shattered something inside him. The hospital lights were too bright. Too sterile. Harlan paced the hallway, his hands shaking, fingers stained with melted snow and faint traces of ink from a forgotten contract. Elsie had been rushed into emergency care, wrapped in warm blankets, hooked up to IVs and oxygen. The doctor, a woman with tired eyes, had asked Harlan a simple question: "Are you the guardian?" He'd hesitated. I don't know." A few minutes later, police arrived. "Routine," they said. Any unidentified child triggered a welfare check. Harlan didn't argue. He just sat in the waiting room, staring at his phone, not calling anyone. Who would he call? His phone was filled with investors, advisors, lawyers, but not one person who would care that a little girl had nearly frozen to death outside his window. How long had he lived like this? He didn't know how much time passed before the officer returned. A clipboard in hand. Questions ready. "Sir, the girl's name is Elsie Moore. She was reported missing 3 weeks ago. Her mother passed away last month. No known next of kin." Harlan felt the words hit like a hammer. Passed away. No next of kin. She was truly alone. The officer lowered his voice. "We found something in her belongings. Thought you should see it." He handed over a folded piece of paper, crumpled at the edges, damp from melted snow. It was a drawing. A child's drawing. In crayon. 3 stick figures holding hands, one big, one small, and another small. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Me, Mommy, an angel man who watches from the window." Harlan's heart stopped. His throat burned. He was in the drawing. A square face. A dark suit. 2 rectangles for windows drawn above him. She had seen him. Every night. And in her lonely little mind, she'd imagined him not as a stranger, but as an angel. A silent guardian who watched over her from the warmth above. Harlan pressed the paper to his chest, eyes stinging. He hadn't cried in 30 years. But he did now. That night, Harlan didn't go home. He stayed by her side, watching the slow rhythm of her breath, the rise and fall of her chest. The machines beeped softly in the dark. And something inside him shifted. Not a flicker. Not a flick. But a flame. Small, steady, and real. By dawn, Harlan Voss was no longer the same man. He didn't recognize it yet, but the walls he'd spent a lifetime building had cracked. And through those cracks, something gentle had begun to pour in. When Elsie opened her eyes that morning, just barely, her gaze searched the room in confusion. The beeping machines. The Ford drip. The window. the blanket wrapped tightly around her. Then her eyes landed on him. Harland. Sitting slouched in a chair, his wrinkled shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his silver watch forgotten in his pocket. Her lips moved. Angel, man? He blinked, stunned. And then, he smiled. It wasn't a business smile. Not the calculated grin he used in boardrooms. It was soft. Human. No, sweetheart, he whispered. Just Harland. The system didn't make it easy. There were evaluations. Home visits. Background checks. Long, sterile meetings where officials tried to understand why a billionaire with no family suddenly wanted to care for a little girl with no one left. But Harland showed up. Every time. He hired therapists. He attended training courses. He canceled deals and cleared his schedule. For the first time in his life, someone's future mattered more than his fortune. He even visited Elsie's old apartment, a crumbling one-room flat above a laundromat. The landlord had kept her mother's belongings in a box marked unclaimed. Inside it, a faded photo, a child's blanket, a cheap plastic music box shaped like a bunny. And a letter. A letter her mother had written, but never mailed. To whoever finds my Elsie, please don't let her grow up thinking the world is cold. She's full of love. She just needs someone to give it to. Harland stood in that dark room, clutching the letter, his eyes burning. He hadn't been there for Caleb. But maybe, just maybe, he could be there for her. The days became brighter. Elsie's cheeks filled out. Her smile returned. She started to laugh again, soft, musical giggles that made Harland stop whatever he was doing just to listen. They painted together. Read together. Took long walks in the park, the same park where she used to sleep. But now, she ran. She climbed. She played. And when she got tired, she reached for his hand without hesitation. She called him Mr. H at first. Then Harland. And finally, one day, quietly, like a secret, she whispered, Dad. He didn't correct her. He just held her tighter. It had been 6 months since that snowy night. The seasons had changed, and so had Harland. He no longer spent his mornings staring blankly out the window of his penthouse. Instead, he spent them packing Elsie's lunch, checking her homework, and struggling, sometimes hilariously, with pigtails and mismatched socks. He laughed more now. He slept better. The echoing silence of his life had been replaced by the sound of tiny feet and bedtime stories. And Elsie? She was blooming. She painted. She sang to her stuffed rabbit. She even made friends at school, real ones. The kind who saved her a seat and invited her to birthday parties. But every so often, when the wind howled a certain way, she'd still reach for his hand. Just to make sure he was there. And Harland always was. One evening, as the last light faded behind the skyline, Elsie approached him, shy and proud. I made something, she said, her voice soft. It was a new drawing. 3 figures again, this time more detailed. A little girl with a pink dress. A tall man in a navy coat. And a woman in the sky, smiling, with stars in her hair. Underneath it, in neat handwriting, me, my dad, and mommy watching us from heaven. Harland didn't speak. He simply pulled her into his arms. And in that moment, all the things he had chased in life, success, power, security, melted into the background. Because this quiet, fragile love was what he had been searching for all along. That night, Harland stood by her door for a long time. Just watching. The little girl who had once been a shadow on a park bench now lay safe and warm beneath soft blankets, her rabbit nestled beside her. He whispered, "Good night, Elsie." And as he turned off the light, she replied without opening her eyes, "Good night, Daddy." We often walk past stories we'll never know. A child sitting quietly. A man staring out a window. A stuffed rabbit left in the snow. But sometimes, the world gives us a moment, a chance, to stop, to see, and to care. And when we do, something incredible happens. We begin to heal. Not just the people we help, but ourselves, too. Harlan Voss never meant to become a father. But in choosing to open his heart, he saved a little girl's life. And she, in return, gave his life meaning. Sometimes, the smallest souls carry the biggest power to change us. All they need is someone to notice. Someone to believe. Someone to care. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in second chances. And remember, the world can feel cold, but kindness, real, human kindness, is still the warmest thing there is. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of what truly matters.